Right, so my name's Larry Lessig. I'm a professor at Stanford. And Stanford gets lots of money from Google for some reasons, I don't know why. But first a comment to Siva and then a question for Harry. The comment for Siva is, it's not actually true to say, Siva, that Google paid $125 million for something that it originally claimed it could do for free. It paid $125 million to do something far beyond what it originally claimed fair use protected it to do. And it explicitly says in the agreement that it does not believe that its original fair use claims are false, as I believe its fair use claims are true. So what it's done is just bought a right that before it never claimed. This is not settling.
For people who are unaware of the settlement, could you take 3 sentences to explain?
Long sentences? I'm a lawyer, so.
Yeah. But I think you can do it. You're talking about the publishing.
Right, so Google originally claimed it had the right to scan these 18 or 36 million books and at least make available snippets of the books that were still in copyright but out of print, period. The settlement gives Google the right to display 20% of a book, plus if a user chooses to then give user access to the full book if they pay. That is wildly more than anybody thought
Siva,
fair use would grant them the right to do.
We'll come to your second question. I want Siva to respond to that. Because basically what's wrong with, especially since a lot of these millions of books were out of print, that you couldn't get to unless you traveled halfway across the world to a dusty library, what you can now get online.
I don't want to argue that making this material available is an example of evil. What was evil was the hubris in arguing that they could fly above the basics of copyright when they do it. And Larry and I have had this argument going on for about 4 years. We don't want to invite everyone else into it. Nonetheless, we're loggerheads on it. But I do want to point out that of the $125 million that Google willfully paid in the settlement, people don't give away money for nothing. They basically were paying the authors and the publishers $91 million to settle the damages that were claimed by the authors and publishers, right? Simple math, no something for nothing. The extra services that Google is now providing will take up $34 million of that $125 million. So in fact, the settlement was a concession that they probably had flown too close to the sun.
Randy Picker wants to add to that.
So don't focus on the dollars. Focus on a different issue. So the basic structure of copyright law is subject to fair use, you have to get permission. Google has done something incredibly clever, evil, I don't know, in the settlement, which is by turning it into an opt-out class action, and now I just said a bunch of legal words that you're not going to like, right? They've effectively changed the default position with regard to how copyright's consent system works. That's either brilliant because of the orphan works problem, clever, or evil. I don't know.
But bottom line, for those of us who aren't lawyers and don't know the terms of the debate, did Google serve its own interests in this deal?
Very much so, I think. Maybe the public interest at the same time.
Larry, you had from the audience, you had a question.
It also served the interests of people who want to read books that were no longer available and authors to get payments.
Right.
Larry, to your question.
So, but to the question to Harry. So you observe that your reason for calling your daughter's company evil is that it complies with the Chinese rules about censoring a certain class of speech. During the political campaign that we've just ended, John McCain complained to YouTube, part of Google, that YouTube was complying with American copyright laws and censoring a whole bunch of speech that he thought should be kept up on the internet. Now, would you say a company is evil when it complies with American law and censors speech, or is a company obliged to keep all speech available regardless of the local law that might control it?
In the case of John McCain, I'm actually with John McCain in wishing that YouTube would exercise a little more judgment before it automatically pulled the campaign videos down, although I understand the practical reasons why that's important, and I understand why under the safe haven rules they would have the knee-jerk reaction. But Google actually could afford to review some of those videos in the middle of a political campaign to make a judgment about whether they were fair use or not, and I wish they had.
But complying with
the audience agree with that? Those who agree, just a round of applause to that. And those who don't agree? Those who don't agree? About 50-50. We're going to go to another question.
I'm John Soppy. I work for King Features, which is an online company. And I must say, someone brought up the point, if you put "don't be evil" over financial services companies, somehow they're miraculously going to think that they're not going to be evil. I think that people that are involved with the mortgage industry and the credit default sweeps, I still think to this day, they probably are doing the benefit and the goodness of the financial services. So here's my question. If Google is willing to limit search to get market share, what would limit them from disclosing personal search information of citizens to gain or maintain a market share?
Jeff Jarvis. Great question when you got to it, by the way.
With all respect, I think you're showing little faith in mankind. It's not Google you have a problem with, but man. Yes, even in a financial organization, there can be someone who would ask the question and force the issue, is this evil? And similarly in Google, there is not only that, but there is also the self-interest that Google does have a brand and a reputation. And if Google messes with us, we can use the internet and find ourselves on Google to get Google back, and we will. So Google, in its enlightened self-interest, I believe, would not mess with us.
We have, yes, I see you, madam.
Hi, I'm Megan Keenan with Wired.com. I'm just wondering about the Yahoo and Google search partnership. And did efforts to stop Google from forming a monopoly just end up speeding up the demise of its competitor? And if you all have any thoughts on who might be able to save Yahoo now that Yang has stepped down?
Yeah, so on the
Randy
question
Picker.
on the question of demise, I mean, I think that the question is Microsoft, who wanted to buy Yahoo before, still a natural purchaser? Obviously, the scuttlebutt in today's newspapers and online is that the change in management yesterday may increase that possibility. So if you ask what the natural deal is, that's the natural deal. It's not obvious to me that deal will actually matter. Maybe Esther's in a better position to talk about that, but that seems to me the most natural next move for Yahoo.
Yeah, there are other acquirers such as AOL, but I think the most important thing to learn from this is that companies that get into trouble usually are not murdered by Google or anybody else. They commit suicide.
Question from the gentleman in the center.
I confess to being the father of a daughter who works at Google also. I would like to ask the panel, either side of the question, where do the shareholders figure into this?
Are they evil, are you asking? Are the shareholders evil?
Well, in a certain sense, yes. And I'm asking that question. I'm asking what response. We're talking about Google as if it was an abstract drawing, okay? When in fact, there are these shareholders out there. And don't they have a voice in how the company behaves, or should they?
Esther.
I think Google feels, and I agree, that shareholders matter, but not a lot. If their interests are short-term profits, they can buy and sell and go away. What the founders wanted to create was a company where they were not driven shortly by short-term shareholder considerations. So they're driven to some extent by long-term shareholder considerations. They don't want to sell their shares. They want this thing to be worth a lot in the long run. And I would say that's the basic attitude.
But Harry Lewis, I think you are almost arguing in your China argument that you're disappointed that shareholders did not protest.
Oh, I think, yes, I think that Google's international reputation would have soared had they stood firmly against the Chinese censorship. It would have been in their long-term interests, as many of the other measures that Google has made had.
Jim Harper?
As to the shareholder question, this is very much like the question of people who complain about Google but don't do anything about it. Shareholders are free to sell, and they would if Google was evil, if they were violating their motto.
Unfortunately,
shareholders
they
hold.
Esther, I don't think your mic was on. Can you make...
Yeah, I know. I don't. Unfortunately, I don't think the shareholders would have sold if they thought Google was evil. They're free to. I also don't think they would have applauded had Google stayed out of China. They probably would not have noticed, to be candid.
Siva?
Someone's been selling Google's shares.
They've been selling everybody's.
Well, exactly, but people have been selling Google shares for reasons they don't disclose, right? It's a simple signal they send to the market. Nonetheless, remember that a publicly traded company that's doing very well can afford to hold out a motto like, don't be evil. When things get tough, and as Harry's brought up, they have to make a decision between revenue and egalitarianism, they're gonna pick revenue, as they have every time.